Is it safe to store petrol and diesel at home, or can it become a dangerous hazard? It is night. A rumor spreads through the city that if tensions in West Asia rise further, if traffic through the Hormuz Strait stops, if ships slow down, then what will happen? What do people think of first? Almost instantly. Rations, gas, electricity, and then suddenly petrol and diesel come to mind. Some people get their bike tanks filled, some start buying extra cans, and some think, why not keep a reserve at home? But this is exactly where the real story begins. Because the question is not just whether fuel will be available or not. The real question is whether you can legally keep petrol or diesel at home, how much you can store, what kind of container you can store it in, and even if you do store it, how long it will remain usable when it will start going bad, and when it will stop being useful fuel and become a hidden danger for your home instead. That fear, that curiosity, and that practical confusion are at the center of this entire story today. It is important to understand the significance of the Hormuz Strait, because this is where global anxiety begins. According to the US Energy Information Administration, in 2024, an average of 20 million barrels per day of oil flowed through this sea route, which was about 20% of global petroleum liquids consumption. Not only that, in 2024, nearly 1/5 of global LNG trade also passed through this route. And the most important point is that a large share of the crude oil and condensate passing through Hormuz goes to Asian markets, including India. So whenever tensions rise in this region, it is natural for this question to arise in India. If the supply chain gets shaken, if shipping costs rise, if insurance becomes expensive, or if tanker movement is affected, will the impact be visible at the retail level? And this is where a very direct question is born in the mind of the common person. If difficult times come, can I keep petrol or diesel in reserve at home? The answer is half yes and half be careful. In India, the Petroleum Act 1934 and the Petroleum Rules 2002 apply to regulate petroleum products. Under these rules, petroleum is classified into different classes based on its flash point, and storage, transport, and licensing conditions are decided accordingly. This is the law that determines how much fuel an ordinary person can keep without a license and in what type of container. Now understand flashpoint in very simple language. The flashpoint of a flammable liquid is the temperature at which it starts releasing enough vapor that even a small spark can ignite it. According to the petroleum rules and PESO documents, petroleum class A is that whose flashpoint is below 23 degrees Celsius. Petroleum class B is that whose flashpoint is 23 degrees Celsius or above, but below 65 degrees Celsius. Petroleum class C is that whose flashpoint is 65 degrees Celsius or above, but below 93 degrees Celsius. This classification matters because the lower the flashpoint, the faster vapors are produced and the higher the ignition risk. That is exactly why petrol is generally considered more dangerous, while diesel is comparatively less volatile. Now let us come directly to the part people most want to know. According to the SOP under the Petroleum Rules 2002 and the exemption clauses under the Petroleum Act, if a petroleum class A product is not being kept for sale, then up to 30 liters can be stored, carried, or kept without a license. But this exemption is not without conditions. This quantity must be kept in securely stoppered containers. If the container is made of glass or stoneware, its capacity must not exceed 1 liter. If the container is metallic, its capacity must not exceed 25 liters. In other words, it is not enough to just hear that 30 liters are allowed. You also have to understand in what vessel, in what manner, and for what purpose it is being kept. There is a very important practical point here. Petrol generally falls under Class A, which is why the 30-liter exemption is mostly discussed in the context of petrol. This means that a person may have a legal exemption to keep a limited quantity for personal use, provided it is not for sale. But that does not mean it is safe or wise to keep a can in the drawing room, on the balcony, under the stairs, in a parking basement, or near the kitchen. A small legal exemption and safe storage are not the same thing. Very often, people stay within the legal limit and still store fuel unsafely, and that is exactly where real accidents begin. In the case of diesel, the picture is somewhat different. According to PESO FAQs, non-bulk quantities of petroleum class B products up to 2500 liters may fall under license exemption, provided the storage conditions comply with the rules. But no one should assume from this that keeping such a large quantity at home is easy or practical. This is not normal household advice. It is a regulatory exemption framework, which may often relate to industrial, agricultural, institutional, or controlled use cases as well. For an ordinary family, keeping that much diesel at home can be a major risk in terms of safety, ventilation, contamination, theft, and fire hazard. So knowing the legal limit and making a safe household decision are two different things. Now come to the real practical fear. Do petrol and diesel also go bad? The answer is yes, and more silently than most people imagine. Fuel going bad does not always mean it suddenly turns black or starts smelling bad. Often, its chemical composition slowly changes. Lighter fractions evaporate. Oxidation begins, gum and deposits start forming. Moisture contamination increases. And then the same fuel starts affecting engine performance, starting combustion, and the filter system. In other words, after a certain time, stored fuel may look fine and still be unfit for use. The story of petrol is the most sensitive. Petrol is a mixture of different hydrocarbons, all with different levels of volatility. When petrol is stored for a long time, especially if the container is not fully sealed, if it is exposed to heat, if it is in contact with air, or if it is opened repeatedly, part of it starts evaporating as vapor. This disrupts the balance of the fuel. The components that were essential for engine performance change in proportion. The result is that old petrol can create problems in starting the engine and can lead to knocking, rough running, or poor combustion. That is why experts say that casually storing petrol for long periods is not a good idea. According to BP's storage guide, if petrol is stored in sealed containers under cover, meaning protected from direct heat and sunlight, it can generally last for about 1 year. But the moment the seal of the container is broken, its life cycle begins to shrink rapidly. The same guide says that under open storage conditions at 20 degrees Celsius, petrol may remain usable for about 6 months, whereas at 30 degrees Celsius, that period may shrink to around 3 months. In a country like India, where ambient temperatures remain at or above 30 degrees for long periods in many regions, this information becomes even more important. That means the statement, "it will last a year," only applies when storage conditions are ideal. In normal household conditions, the time can be much shorter. And this is exactly where the biggest mistake happens. People fill petrol into just any plastic can and keep it on the terrace, in a storeroom, in a hot place, or near a vehicle. Then they assume that fuel is fuel, and months later it will remain the same. But heat, repeated opening, poor cap sealing, moisture, and contamination quietly keep degrading the quality of the petrol. You may not identify it with your eyes every time, but the engine will. In many cases, stale petrol affects small engines, generators, bikes, and lawn equipment first, because their fuel systems are more sensitive. That is why fuel storage has to be seen, not just in terms of quantity, but also quality and condition. The story of diesel is slightly different, and that is why many people consider it safer. Diesel is not as volatile as petrol, so evaporation loss is comparatively lower. This is why people tend to think that diesel can be stored comfortably. But that does not mean diesel does not degrade. During long storage, diesel can develop oxidation products, gum-like substances, and sediment. This can clog fuel filters, affect injectors, and reduce engine efficiency. During long-term storage, diesel can also become darker in color. So the danger with diesel is a little less about ignition and more about degradation and contamination. According to BP's guide, when stored in a sealed container and kept under cover, diesel too can generally remain safe for about a year and in some conditions even longer. But with an open container or poor sealing, problems begin to grow. The biggest reason is moisture. Humidity in the air can turn into condensation inside the container. That water then creates a favorable environment for microbial growth, bacteria and fungi. After that, sludge-like problems can develop in the fuel tank or stored diesel. That is why biocide treatment is recommended in long-term diesel storage. BP's guide suggests considering such treatment every 6 months for prolonged storage. Now understand this entire matter in the household context. Suppose, out of fear, you kept 20 or 25 liters of petrol in a metal can. If that can is not certified, if the cap does not seal properly, if the place is hot, ventilation is poor, and there is an electric spark, switchboard, inverter, generator, cigarette, mosquito coil, or kitchen flame nearby, then you have not just stored fuel. You have also placed a hidden ignition risk inside your home. The same applies to diesel too, even if its flash risk is lower. Because spill, smell, contamination, accidental misuse, and children's access create a different kind of danger. The law may give you a limited exemption, but you have to create the safety yourself. It is also important to understand that underground tanks at petrol pumps and cans, stored at home, cannot be compared. Large fuel systems exist in designed infrastructure, where turnover is fast, ventilation is controlled, containment systems exist, and safety norms are followed. On the other hand, fuel stored at home remains stagnant, may be opened repeatedly, may not be labeled properly, the container may not meet standards, and temperature control does not exist. So the fuel that appears safe at a fuel pump may become risky if kept at home for a long period. That is why the argument that if it can be kept at the pump, why not at home, is technically weak. Now let us talk about LPG, because many people weigh petrol, diesel, and LPG on the same scale. LPG behaves differently. Inside a sealed cylinder, LPG does not degrade the way petrol and diesel do, where after a few months the quality can noticeably deteriorate. In Indian Oil's FAQ, it is clearly explained in the context of cylinder markings that the testing or marking on the cylinder indicates the cylinder's periodic test due date, not the expiry of the gas itself. In other words, in the case of LPG, the concern is less about fuel degradation and more about cylinder safety, valve integrity, leakage risk, and periodic testing. So LPG does not work on the logic of it gets old and goes bad, but on the logic of is the cylinder safe or not. But that does not at all mean that unlimited LPG cylinders should be kept at home. LPG has its own separate safety rules, distributor norms, and residential restrictions. That is why liquid fuel and LPG should not be compared only on the basis of shelf life. With petrol and diesel, degradation and contamination are major concerns, while with LPG, leakage and pressure handling risks matter more. So treating all three fuels in the same way under the label of emergency reserve can be a very serious mistake. So what is the wisest conclusion for an ordinary home? The first truth is that panic buying usually does not provide a practical solution. Instead, it creates unnecessary risk. The second truth is that a limited legal exemption does not mean unlimited household safety. The third truth is that petrol is highly volatile, and without ideal sealed conditions, its usable life can drop rapidly. The fourth truth is that diesel, though comparatively more stable, can still suffer from moisture sludge and microbial contamination. And the fifth truth is that the decision to store fuel should not be based only on does the law allow it or not, but on what are the house conditions, what is the family situation, what is the temperature, what is the container like, what is the safety discipline, and what is the real need. If we say it very plainly, then for personal use at home, keeping a small quantity of fuel may be possible within the legal framework, especially in the context of the 30-liter petrol exemption. But the safe meaning of this is not that people should start stockpiling large quantities in an atmosphere of fear. Fuel is as useful as it is sensitive. It can protect your mobility, but if stored improperly, it can become a danger to your property, your vehicle, and your personal safety. That is why it is very important to understand the difference between emergency preparedness and reckless hoarding. And now come back to that same scene where a man at night holding a can is thinking, let me fill it now, it may help later. The question is not whether fuel can be stored at home or not. The question is whether you are storing it in the right container, in the right quantity, in the right place, for the right duration, and with the right understanding. Because petrol and diesel are not just liquids. They are chemistry, they are law, and they are risk. A little reserve may sometimes be practical, but unnecessary stockpiling is not wisdom. Real safety lies not in stored fuel, but in an informed decision. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson of this whole story. A decision made in fear often turns out to be the most expensive one, but a decision made with proper information turns out to be the safest.
If our video has taught you something new, do not forget to like and share this video so that this information can reach others as well. Your likes and shares are a source of inspiration for us. If you have any questions or suggestions, please let us know in the comments. It will be our honor to answer your questions and listen to suggestions. And yes, if you like our content, subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so that you stay connected with every new story. Thank you. GRT Business YouTube channel sources, news from various news agencies, opinion polls and other public sources. We try to ensure that every report and summary is accurate and verified, but we are not responsible for any dispute or error. Our aim is only to provide you with accurate information.